is the policy because you can't deny, regardless of where you fall on the political scale, he got an achievement. He got a bipartisan bill through. There's something to tout there. There's things that are being done, but the question is do you have a communication strategy equal to that policy strategy that both the media and the American voters actually care enough about to lean into the conversation?
Well, and, I look back at us when we were trying to roll out, the investments that have been made in clean technology. And some of those companies that received money would later have problems, right? So that was, of course, when, Solyndra was one, for example, that President Obama had visited, and it had a number of problems in the aftermath. Now, what President Biden is leaning into differently and what he's trying to roll out with his Bidenomics is more, like the government's investment. Now, a lot of that relies on private contractors. There can be issues. It goes to the states. The states then manage a lot of the projects. I'm talking to someone about Chris Christie getting into the race. And of course, Chris Christie over his tenure had some problems with even in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy with some of the private contractors seen to receive bids that they weren't necessarily qualified for. That's like as old as time in politics, it seems. But, so I've always thought that the White House needs to get more aggressive. And if they really do believe that they have a candidate like FDR, then they should have those fireside chats. And they could do it via a podcast or something like that. So far, Boyd, and you and I both know this, he hasn't engaged with the media very much. And the White House is, figuring out a way to engage correctly with the media. And I'm not sure they've landed on the right spot. Of course, the previous campaign was different in the midst of a pandemic. This one, a lot of Americans aren't necessarily paying attention every day to politics. So, could he roll out policy? I think they're going to have to get a lot more aggressive about telling their story. And doing something like that through owned media would actually probably be very effective because a lot of people would end up carrying it.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating thing. And the FDR comparison, I think, is really interesting because I agree. I think they could actually lean into it and do something with it. The president kind of haphazardly kind of grazed past it today in terms of, high-speed internet being like, water and electricity back in FDR's day. And so if you were advising them on that, what is it that you'd have them do? Where would you start to lean into that conversation?
I would. I'd do something like a limited series podcast on what the administration's point of view of investments and how they're actually going to get to the American people. I would lean heavily on, they have a lot of experts in the administration, economic experts. When they're talking about inflation, I had a great episode with Mick Mulvaney recently when we were talking about what is inflation. Well, slowing our production of goods during the pandemic causes inflation to some extent because it's too much money chasing too few goods. That's what inflation is. And so the Biden team could explain, their model for tackling that is to increase our productivity by investing in things like infrastructure and technologies that will help us get more products to more consumers. I don't think, the ordinary person is thinking about it that way. And so it may seem a little disconnected and relying on a media that's, chasing sometimes not you, not News Nation, but
others, present company excluded.
Sometimes the shiny object can distract from them being able to really deliver their message. And they're not doing even as much owned media as we did during the Obama administration. What I mean by that is we had a number of videos we would put out direct to the voters. And while, you try to put those things out with some regular rhythm, we did it. It was like every Friday we would put something out. And I went on the White House, YouTube channel, and a lot of the stuff that they're putting out there is a daily briefing. which is driven by the questions
Right.
that the reporters are asking largely. So they need to own the narrative a little bit more.
Yeah, owning that narrative, driving that message. Again, you got to have a communication strategy equal to the policy strategy. And I think if the president is looking for a podcast, Press Advance would probably be a good place for the president to start.
It would be a good one. It would be a good one. Now, I have to, before we wrap, I do have to point out News Nation is doing something with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This Wednesday. There's a town hall between 9 and 10 p.m. Eastern that's going to air. And count me a skeptic when it comes to RFK Jr., and I'm sure I'll be doing analysis before and after. And man, oh man, he had to send us all that video where he's shirtless in jeans working out, which is also highly questionable. But
almost Putin-esque there. Yeah.
Truly, wasn't it? It was a little bizarre. But the town hall is not going to be, I can promise that's going to be substance with Elizabeth Vargas reports this Wednesday. And so that I'm actually looking forward to see what he says.
Yeah, that'll be a great conversation. We will cover it. We may have you come back and help us break that all down on Thursday. Johanna Maska, political contributor for News Nation. You can catch her every day, 3 p.m. Mountain Time, The Hill there on News Nation. She's also the CEO of Global Situation Room and the podcast. Don't miss the podcast, Press Advance. And Johanna, thanks for joining us today.
Great pleasure. Good talk.
All right. Again, that's Johanna Maska. You want to check that out, News Nation. And as she went through all of those components, I agree with her. I don't think the president has leaned in enough in terms of a communication strategy. And that's going to be a test, not just rolling through the summer. Summer's always a little tricky, but getting into fall, the message will have to match it if he wants to gain momentum going into 2024.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. Summer celebrations are almost here.
You can light off your own fireworks until 11 p.m. on the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, midnight on the 4th.
And the fireworks stands are open.
Even if it's green, it can still burn.
Don't burn down Utah. And come here for updates on safety and restrictions. KSL News Radio, your summertime fun companion for news.
You're not the one to back down from a challenge. Well, here's one that not only challenges you to be better, it makes everyone around you better. Take the Clear the Air Challenge, starting July 1. July 1st through 31st, you get the chance to reduce your vehicle emissions by choosing alternative methods of transportation using TravelWise strategy. By driving less and driving smarter, you ultimately help improve air quality, reduce congestion, and conserve energy. To achieve this, TravelWise suggests strategies that include carpooling, riding public transit, teleworking, trip chaining, walking, biking, even using scooters, all aimed at reducing emissions and promoting improvement of Utah's air quality. Sign up and get started on the best challenge of your life. Begin at cleartheairchallenge.org and get details. cleartheairchallenge.org. The Clear the Air Challenge, hosted by the Salt Lake Chamber, along with its partners Utah Clean Air Partnership and TravelWise Utah. cleartheairchallenge.org.
Are you finally ready to lose the fat for life? Imagine the new you and feeling good in your body without the discomfort and even pain from the excess weight. Get a free consultation today at Revive Men's Health here in Salt Lake City to assess your health and discuss if their safe and effective weight loss treatment with semaglutide is a good fit for you. They offer treatments for men, couples, women, or anyone who may need support in their weight loss goals or who may benefit from semaglutide support with pricing up to 60% less than the name brand medications. They also offer comprehensive DNA-based testing to help you understand your metabolism to make sustained weight loss, better performance, and fitness a reality. Join our satisfied patients who are maintaining substantial weight loss. Call Revive today and book your free consultation. Men, women, and couples are all welcome at Revive. Book your free appointment today, saving you $199. Call 801-263-7777. That's 801-263-7777. Or visit ReviveMen'sHealth.com.
Getting help with plumbing repairs is easier than you think. All you have to do is call Any Hour Services or schedule an appointment at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
Register for breaking news updates by texting the word news to the Cypress Credit Union KSL text line at 57500.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bonas. First, the body of a missing 14-year-old has been found at Hiram Reservoir. Second, the Utah Jazz have traded Rudy Gay to the Atlanta Hawks for John Collins and a second-round draft pick. Collins is from Utah. He was born in Layton. Third, President Biden has been talking with world leaders, including Ukraine's president, about the mutiny by a mercenary group that had them moving toward Moscow over the weekend. They turned around when they were just 120 miles from Russia's capital. Right now, 83 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Boyd Matheson divides rage from reason on Inside Sources.
Many U.S. officials are still trying to make sense of a whirlwind of events over the weekend. From Moscow, Russian mercenary boss Prigozhin led his forces on what he called a protest, what Putin called a mutiny. Just a few moments ago, literally 5 minutes ago, Vladimir Putin took to the airwaves to describe some of the things that had happened. Either way, this is a historic challenge to Vladimir Putin's leadership and control on the country. There's a deal apparently struck with Prigozhin, exiled to Belarus. But we want to break down, where is this really? What does this mean? And more importantly, where does it go next? And we're really pleased to have John Hudson, national security reporter at the Washington Post, covering the State Department and diplomacy, on the line. And John, obviously this has been a fast-moving series of events over the weekend. You had a great piece in the Post talking about kind of the future of this, how long this truce or agreement or whatever it is, if it holds or not. Give us your assessment, again, especially with Vladimir Putin just making a statement moments ago.
Exactly. He just made remarks and promising to crack down and prosecute those who, were traitors against the Russian state. Gave a little bit of a moment of sympathy for those Wagner troops who he said were tricked and deceived into being part of this uprising. But we still are lacking a ton of details on what this means for the Russian state's relationship with this mercenary group, which has political and military tentacles all throughout Africa and through the Middle East, and plays a significant role in protecting autocratic leaders and those government leaders of fragile states that are dealing with their own rebellions, mutinies, and in some cases jihadist threats. So there's still a lot that we're trying to learn about what this means. What you saw with President Putin trying to address the country was trying to assert the sense of control. Obviously, this was, as he said in the introduction, the greatest threat to his grip on power since he assumed this decades ago. So it's still very much a wait-and-see moment.
Yeah, so interesting. And I thought one of the other things that Putin just said moments ago that caught my attention was that these Wagner forces, whether they were tricked or whether they chose to go, that they now have two options, that they can either sign on with the Russian military, sign a contract there, or they can go to Belarus. That back half seemed a little odd to me, that one thing for Prigozhin to go to Belarus, but if they're allowing other Wagner forces to go there, that doesn't seem like that bodes well for Putin and company.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, right, that you would offer this, allowing forces who you've accused of being traitorous to basically camp out and sort of have asylum in a neighboring state. Now, none of those people should be resting easy. They've been basically identified as an enemy of the Kremlin, and so you'd want to, avoid windows and avoid, busy streets. Yeah, exactly. Have a taste tester around you. But it is quite interesting. Belarus also, one of the most closed states in Europe, sometimes referred to as the North Korea of Europe.
Right.
I was there a few years ago, and this is it's a totalitarian state, and it's not a place where you would imagine wanting to live out the rest of your life, especially if you have more than 10 years to live. It's a sleepy place where not a lot is happening. So that's another thing that has led people to believe that this is more tenuous than Putin is making it out to be, and that there's really another chapter to be told in the story.
Yeah, at least one chapter and maybe several. And let's go to one of those chapters, which of course is dealing with Ukraine. And what does this mean in terms of Ukraine? I know you've been scrambling today between State Department press conferences and Vladimir Putin speaking, and the State Department, of course, is saying, "Hey, we're out of this. We're monitoring this." But many, of course, are looking at this of, is this an opportunity for Ukraine? What does that look like? What's your sense as it relates to Ukraine?
Yeah. So the big thing to remember is that the Russian military is still the dominant force when it comes to being entrenched in areas that the Ukrainians want to dislodge the Russians for. These are the areas that were captured after the February 24th invasion, areas that have deep trenches built and a sort of network of defenses that are really hard to break into. And so we shouldn't expect that to get much easier, even with the departure of Wagner forces. Now, Wagner forces were pretty critical and essential in the capture of Bakhmut, which was, the most important military success that they've had in several months. And so you could see a dynamic whereby Russia is still able to defend the territory that it's captured, but less so pose a offensive threat. So how that changes the battlefield dynamics, it's a complex situation, and it's still unclear. But no one should assume it's going to be just a open field for the Ukrainians.
Right. And I'm so glad you raised that, because I think it is a lot of people thinking, oh, this is it. They can just march forward. But you've got trenches, as you said, you've got landmines all over the place and protected forces that way. I wanted to ask you one question. This is what I've been curious about today, and some of this came from reading your reporting on this, and that is it seems to me that as far as the Russian troops are concerned, they've been kind of isolated, not had their phones and so on. Is there a communication strategy to get to the Russian forces to say, look, Wagner's out, Putin has some cracks in the armor, and maybe try to undermine the will of the Russian forces? Is that part of this whole strategy? Should we be watching anything there?
It's a great question, because information warfare is such an important element of war tactics in Eastern Europe ever since 2015. They've really played a big role. Now, you hear about the Russians doing this to Ukrainian forces a lot, sending them Ukrainian and Russian language messages to give up hope that you won't be looked after for if you're injured, that Ukrainians soldiers are dying in hospitals for lack of care. You hear less about Western and Ukrainian tactics to build up morale or build up an incentive for Russian troops, but that those do exist. And the CIA has done efforts to try to compel defectors and have people give up arms. But certainly, I think there's going to be a lot of U.S. intelligence officials seeing this as a potential opportunity, and it will be interesting if we uncover different ways that they are trying to seize the moment and wage influence campaign operations against Russian forces. Right now, just not a lot of information about that.
Yeah. Great insight, though. Great reporting. And, John, I know you've got a lot ahead of you as this continues to unfold. John Hudson's national security reporter at the Washington Post, covering the State Department and diplomacy. And, John, great piece in the Post today. Great perspective. And we look forward to having you back as we continue to watch this unfold minute by minute.
Yeah, great to be with you.
All right, again, that's John Hudson from the Washington Post. And literally 10 minutes ago, Vladimir Putin took to the airwaves talking about the Wagner Group and talking about the fact that those troops could either sign a contract with the Russian military or they could go to Belarus with their leader. That's a crazy thing to consider, that Vladimir Putin would be okay with that moving forward. So I think, as John pointed out for us, this is still very tenuous, not a lot of confidence in what has been reported or what's being said, either by the president of Belarus or by Vladimir Putin. And I think there will be a very strategic communication strategy being played out. Remember, for armies, it's often they run out of energy and will before they run out of opportunity to fight. And I think there'll be a lot of that going on in the days ahead. All right, we'll step aside for some bottom of the hour news. When we come back, we're going to look at some of the 2024 presidential polling, what it means for President Biden, what does it mean for the former President Trump, and for all the other candidates as well. What are we missing? What should we be watching for? Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's 1:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top national story this hour. We have breaking news. Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the mutiny by mercenaries from the Wagner Group who were marching on Moscow over the weekend before they were persuaded to turn around. In the address carried on CNN, Putin thanked loyal Russian soldiers who kept the situation from getting worse.
I thank great thanks to those soldiers who've taken the only right decision to stop the flowing of blood, the bloodshed.
The founder of the Wagner Group has reportedly gone into exile in Belarus and said he called off the march to Moscow to avoid bloodshed. Here in Utah, forestry fire in state lands is breaking ground on a new wildland fire operations center in South Salt Lake. Fire Management Officer Brett Osler told David Dujanovic the new center will increase efficiency.
To have a better facility so that we're not strung out across the state, and it's going to better help us respond to the wildfire crisis here in Utah.
The current facility is at Point of the Mountain and was built 45 years ago. And the Utah Jazz bringing a native son home to play in the Delta Center. They've acquired forward John Collins from the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for Rudy Gay and a future second-round pick. Collins was born in Layton, was the 19th pick for Atlanta in 2017. He has 2 years left on his contract with the Hawks. Gay had 1 season left on his contract with the Jazz. Collins expected to play alongside Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler for the Jazz as their new draft pick, Taylor Hendricks, develops as a player. Our top national story, the man accused in the mass shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs was in court today, pleading guilty to a long list of charges in that case. Judge Michael McHenry asked Anderson Lee Aldrich about his pleas.
As I analyze this paperwork, I see that it attempts to reflect your desire to plead guilty to 5 counts of murder in the first degree, 46 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, and 2 bias-motivated crimes. Is this, in fact, what you wish to do?
Yes, Your Honor.
The judge told him the guilty pleas could result in 5 consecutive life sentences. Your money at this moment. The Dow Jones average up 81 points on the day, while the NASDAQ is down about 95. And our KSL weather, we've got sunshine today, but maybe storms moving in by the middle of the week. That's next. KSL News Time, 1:32.
We have enough people running around Broadcast House at 4 in the morning to field a football team.
Producers, reporters, the traffic team, and us.
This is Tim and Amanda.
Join us each morning from 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
After a long winter, it's finally that time again. Pack your picnics, bring your family and friends, and get ready for memorable musical summer evenings. The Deer Valley Music Festival with the Utah Symphony is back. Beat the heat, break out of the routine, and escape into the mountains and the music. June 30th through August 4th in Park City. Tickets are on sale now at deervalleymusicfestival.org. Step back in time as classical guitarist Pablo Sainz Villegas brings the passionate romance of old-century Spain to center stage with expressive and danceable music, from the fandango to the tango. The Utah Symphony's Deer Valley Music Festival presents Spanish guitarist Pablo Sainz Villegas. Take in the mesmerizing melodies in the beauty of the mountains, July 1st in Park City. Tickets are on sale now at deervalleymusicfestival.org.
Men who have given up in their intimate life because of prostate issues, testicular cancer, or simply no ED treatments you've tried have worked. It's not the end. At Summit Men's Health, they have a customized approach for each individual patient to get results they desire and deserve. Stop wasting your time and money with treatments that don't work for most men, like Shockwave, Viagra, or the shots. Summit Men's Health guarantees results in your first visit or you don't pay. Call Summit Men's Health today and get the spark back in your relationship. Summit Men's Health, 435-500-2750. They're so confident this will work for you, they promise if you don't get results in your first visit, Summit Men's Health will pay you $500 cash, no questions asked. Call Summit Men's Health today at 435-500-2750 to get the passion back in your love life. Call Summit Men's Health at 435-500-2750.
Tim and Amanda.
If this is the first time you've ever joined us, can we just say welcome, welcome? I hope you come back and see us again. Tim and I have been doing this for a long time, and we love what we do. But the best part of what we do always and will always be connecting with you.
How many times do we say people don't understand how much information and really love we get from that side of the radio?
Yes.
They thank us for giving it to them, but we get it back so many times.
Wake up with Utah's Morning News with Tim and Amanda, 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high yield savings certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
Crews have just cleared the South Salt Lake crash westbound 3300 south at Main Street. That right lane is open again. But we have fire crews on the scene of a vehicle fire in Utah County, southbound I-15, about a mile south of Payson on the right. Fill up your bucket list in Box Elder County. History, recreation, and wildlife, along with excellent dining and shopping await you. Find out more at visitboxeldercounty.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, warm, dry, breezy across Utah with a low pressure system moving in midweek. That will increase our chances for thunderstorms. High today 91, tomorrow 84. Right now 85 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio 102.7 FM 1160 AM and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources.
Inside Sources.
America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson.
On Utah's home for elevated conversation.
Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
A lot of new polls circulating out there talking about the upcoming presidential election, and many of these polls don't have good news for current President Joe Biden. They don't have good news for former President Donald Trump. And I'm not even sure they have good news for many of the candidates who have jumped in the race to compete for the nomination for their party. So the question is, what are Americans really saying about all of this? Where are we really in the process? And what happens between now and Labor Day before things really start to heat up? And we always turn to Carly Cooperman, who, of course, is the CEO of Schoen Cooperman Research, the best of the best out there when it comes to polling and interpretation of the numbers. Carly, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So as you look at some of these numbers, we've got new numbers out from CNN, which had some pretty negative numbers for kind of all of the above category. Nobody got off really well. We've also had some around age and health and some of those. But what are you seeing in the trend lines? What are you watching as it relates to the numbers?
Look, this is the first poll that we've seen that shows a real drop in support for Trump among Republicans and Republican-leaning voters. After the indictment that came out recently. So we see that, this showed a 10-point drop in Trump's favorability from Republican voters or Republican-leaning independents from 77% back in May to 67%, and also a 6-point drop among these same group of voters in terms of who their first choice would be. It was 53% a few months ago, now 47%. And then nearly a quarter say that they would not consider backing his candidacy under any circumstances. So this is the first drop we're seeing, but also it's a little too early to make big conclusions because it's not something that we've seen across the board in other polls. So it's something we're going to be looking at closely over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing. These are all little snapshots along the way, and as you said, it is the first time you've seen that drop. And so you would think a lot of the other candidates on the Republican side would be chomping at the bit, that's good news for them. But they didn't really make a lot of progress either in these latest polls.
That's exactly right. And that's the second piece that comes with this. It's like, yeah, sure, Trump is going down a little bit in terms of his ratings, but there has not been real progress for DeSantis, who has been, the second choice for many, or the second place in these horse races. And the other thing that was interesting in that poll that we saw among Republicans and Republican-leaning voters is that they don't want the other Republican candidates to attack Trump on the indictment, and some want them to condemn the prosecution. So it's not this rallying cry to go against Trump per se. It's almost just like they're maybe questioning some sentiments towards him, but not necessarily jumping to rally around anybody else.
Yeah, I think that part is really interesting to me, that that you've got the public who's saying don't go all out against, and don't just totally focus your campaign on the indictment part of the process. You got to make your own case, which I think is a good thing. And so that's all really interesting. We'll see how that continues to play out. Now let's go to the current occupant of the White House. And again, you'd think maybe a little momentum. We were talking earlier in the show. It is Monday, so it is Transportation Week, month, or century. Both political parties have been focused on this for almost 8 years now. What is the current president looking at by way of numbers?
Right. So in this poll, Trump's job approval is 32%, with 56% disapproving. It's not good, certainly, and not where he wants to be. I would say by comparison, it's basically almost the same as what Trump's approval ratings are. But, polling has consistently not shown strong ratings for Biden, but it's still his nomination to lose. He's still, there's nobody that is close to him in, trial horse races on the Democratic side. And while Democrats themselves, they communicate a lack of enthusiasm towards his candidacy, we're still seeing very strong enthusiasm from Democrats in terms of their willingness to vote. And so at the end of the day, reluctantly, if it were today, a lot of Democrats would come out and vote for Biden.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important component to all of this. So we had Johanna Maska, who, of course, was a former press advance person for President Obama, talking about what President Biden needed to do to lean into a positive message, or one that they could get some momentum behind, and they haven't seemed to quite find their footing, and so that they tend to fall back on what you just described, Carly, of a choice election as opposed to an agenda election.
That's right, and that's what Biden has said multiple times in terms of response to his own poll numbers. It doesn't matter how bad they are; it's just about comparison to the person that I'm running against. And look, even though I don't think that's the most, certainly not the most optimistic take, and maybe not idealistically one I would get behind, at the same time, at the end of the day, we haven't seen something that has brought the Democratic Party together more than Donald Trump and his candidacy in a very long time.
That's right. The great unifier for the Democrats has been found.
Right.
So anything else underneath the numbers that you're watching as we roll through the summer? Obviously, Robert Kennedy Jr. has been getting a little traction. I'm not sure the new fitness workout videos are the be-all, end-all strategy, but anything you're seeing bubbling up underneath some of those numbers as it relates to that?
Well, look, I mean, I think his candidacy is interesting and one that people are keeping an eye on, not because he necessarily has the ability to build mainstream support based on some of the other positions he's stayed in the past, but because it does reflect some degree of dissatisfaction that definitely exists within the Democratic Party. And from the Biden administration perspective, it's certainly, a pain in their side, because the last thing they want is to have to engage in a debate or, something like that, which could show just some fraying within the party, and also, expose weaknesses with Biden. So I am, going to be watching to see if there's any momentum that builds in that regard. And, some people come out in support for him, and there is certainly some momentum he has.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting numbers day to be sure. Carly Cooperman's the CEO and partner at Schoen Cooperman Research. They are the best. And Carly, we always appreciate you breaking down the numbers for us and helping us see beyond the headlines. Thanks for jumping on with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Talk to you soon.
All right. Again, that's Carly Cooperman from Schoen Cooperman. And again, the numbers are so interesting. There was not really good news for any of the candidates when it comes to these numbers. Not great news for former President Donald Trump. His numbers have definitely dropped for the first time following the last indictment. Not great news in the numbers for current President Joe Biden. And not great news for any of the candidates who are trying to depose either one of them. They have not got the traction yet or been able to make the case to the American people. Part of that might be the American people aren't quite paying attention yet. it is summertime. The real things will begin to heat up after Labor Day. But all of these are just very subtle, very interesting trends that you watch in a campaign. And then you watch where the messaging goes as a result and who can actually begin to lead out on a message, who has a message that suddenly gets some traction. For some of those who are trying to get momentum to their campaign to make it onto a debate stage in August, particularly on the Republican side, can they capture lightning in a bottle and have a social media moment? Can they have a big breakthrough moment on an interview that can propel them into that important thing called momentum? Every campaign wants it. You're not always sure how to get it. But I guarantee you it doesn't come from the dollars and cents. It comes from boots on the ground and people actually working the process. All right, we'll step aside for a quick break. When we come back, one of those candidates, Governor Ron DeSantis, was not in Florida today. He was in Texas on the border talking about immigration, border security. We'll talk about what he talked about, why it matters. Coming up next. We'll be right back.
Utah's four seasons. Winter, more winter, scorching heat, road work. As the orange cones and yellow vests appear, count on the resources at KSL to help you steer clear. We'll let you know where the detours, closures, and slow spots are.
Come on, go!
Road improvement updates on your drive-in mornings and drive-home afternoons. All summer on KSL News Radio.
And we're live here outside the Perez family home, just waiting for and there they go, almost on time this morning. Mom is coming out the front door strong with a double-arm kid carry. Looks like Dad has the bags. Daughter is bringing up the rear. Oh, but the diaper bag wasn't closed. Diapers and toys are everywhere. Ooh, but Mom has just nailed the perfect car seat buckle for the toddler. And now the eldest daughter, who looks to be about 9 or 10, has secured herself in the booster seat. Dad zips the bag closed, and they're off. But looks like Mom doesn't realize her coffee cup is still on the roof of the car. And there it goes. Oh, that's a shame. That mug was a fam favorite.
Don't sweat the small stuff. Just nail the big stuff. Like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Learn more at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Visit nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
At Shane Company, we believe everybody is made to shine. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Shining is not for a chosen few. Like a rare gemstone, each one of us was created under just the right set of circumstances. Your moments, your milestones, your love story, all deserve to shine bright. You don't need an occasion or an invitation. You and your life are the event. At Shane Company, we handcraft our jewelry with the greatest care and hand select the most beautiful gemstones so you can shine. So put on a pair of earrings that make your eyes sparkle. Wear diamonds that light up the room. Try on sapphires in every color of the rainbow. Give an heirloom that collects new stories with each generation. We're all made to shine. Shane Company, fine jewelry since 1929.
Today and tomorrow only, Zerorez is running their famous $25 sale. Get on the schedule today. Visit Zerorez.com to get your spot today.
You trust us for news and information in your car. Now trust us at home. KSL News Radio is your window to the outside world, keeping you informed on the latest breaking news, weather, traffic, sports, and more. Listen on your Amazon Echo or Google Home device. Just say, Alexa, open KSL News Radio, or listen on the KSL News Radio app. Text the word app to 57500. KSL News Radio, Utah's all-day companion for news.
Dave and Debbie.
One of my favorite things about Debbie is when we're in the middle of an interview, a light flips on and there's something that she picked out. I call it her spidey sense. And then she just tenaciously goes after that line of questioning. If someone tries to spin it, she's respectful, but she's firm. And she won't let you go with just that easy, trite answer. She's going to get down to the bottom of it, and I love it.
I've always been impressed with Dave's ability to go back in his his memory bank and drag out factual details from previous interviews, weeks, months, even years ago. It is phenomenal to watch that happen because it adds so much context to our coverage in the moment. Dave's got it all right up here in his brain, and that's impressive.
This is a thing that Debbie does not do well. On-the-fly math.
I agree. So one thing I agree with him on.
Listen for Dave and Dejanovic 9 to noon on KSL News Radio.
Join KSL in the Movie Show this Friday from 9 to noon at the Salt Lake NPS store at 1600 Empire Road in Salt Lake City, npsstore.com.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bonas. First, Russia's president addressed the mutiny by Wagner mercenaries in a speech from the Kremlin today. Second, the Jazz announced a trade today that sends a veteran player to Atlanta and brings John Collins to Utah. And third, Utah's building a new interagency fire center to coordinate response to wildfires. Right now, 87 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Earlier today, Florida Governor and 2024 presidential candidate Ron DeSantis spoke to voters in Texas about his border security plan. So we want to take a look at the policy proposals because there's a few things in there that I think are good and I think are in alignment with the American people. And there's a few things in there that I have a real problem with. So very interesting. Governor DeSantis, not speaking from Florida, speaking from Texas on the border, went at a whole host of things. And I want to break this down just a little bit. This is the first time we've really heard from Governor DeSantis in a policy perspective, really specific as it relates to border security and immigration. So Governor DeSantis said that while Florida isn't a border state, it does have a maritime border. And Florida's been working in conjunction with the Coast Guard to stop illegal immigration, and it may be a little bit more than you think.
We have people try to run illegally with boats into the Florida Keys in particular and other parts of South Florida. Haiti, the Bahamas, Cuba, you name it. And so this is the Coast Guard's responsibility to take care of this, and they do a good job, but they do not have enough resources to stop all the boats. And so we were in a situation where Coast Guard started dumping some people in the Florida Keys, and then you had some boats coming through. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. And so I declared a state of emergency. We surged all of our marine assets to fill the gaps where the Coast Guard wasn't able to do. And so what happens is you have a boat, maybe there'll be 15 Haitians on it coming illegally. You stop the boat, you bring the Haitians to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard deports them back to Haiti. And guess what happened once people saw that that was likely to be the result of them trying to enter illegally? The number of boats plummeted that were trying to even come in the first place.
So that's a really interesting thing. Most people don't think of Florida as being a place where you have a lot of illegal immigration going on. So DeSantis went on to say that the lesson that they had learned by tag teaming the assets of the state of Florida with the Coast Guard could actually be applied similarly to the southern border, because the current administration is creating all the wrong incentives, and it simply isn't working.
And the same principle applies here at the southern border. If they come and know what'll be happen is they'll get a sheet of paper saying come up for a court date in 3 years and just go enjoy the United States, well, then they're going to do that. If they come and if they're denied entry or if they're immediately repatriated, well, guess what? People are not going to want to mess with this. They're not going to pay some coyote thousands of dollars to be able to do it because they know the United States enforces its laws, and that's just the way it is. So we have to reestablish the rule of law in this country.
So establishing that rule of law, again, he said that the efforts that he took as governor in tandem with the Coast Guard actually decreased the number of ships that were coming into those waters in the Florida Keys in particular, because those people on those boats knew that it wasn't like they were in and good and that they would be given some court date 3 years down the line. The fact that they knew that they would be transferred to another vessel and returned to wherever they came from lessened the incentive. Now, here's an interesting component to what Governor DeSantis was trying to do. He was also trying to balance this idea, this need to enforce the rule of law. You just heard him say that. He's also trying to insert this element of compassion. And this idea, we talk about it a lot on this show, that compassion and rule of law are actually compatible principles. So when it comes to asylum, Governor DeSantis says that some asylum seekers are legitimate, and that's where compassion comes in. He also said that if elected, he would take executive action to toughen requirements for asylum seekers because many of them just aren't legitimate.
We'll do it through executive action where we will not entertain those claims at the southern border. We'll make it very clear to people. We'll make it very clear that while we support the idea of bona fide asylum, 90+% of these cases are not legitimate, and it's being used to be able to shoehorn them into this country against the law. So we're going to definitely do that.
Now, there was something that Governor DeSantis said in there that caused my red flag warnings to sound the alarm. In the course of this speech, he talked about Representative Chip Roy, representative from Texas, and what might be done legislatively in Congress. But then you heard in that last soundbite, Governor DeSantis said that he will do things by executive order. And that's where the red flags go up. Now, Republicans have been very critical of President Biden of circumventing Congress and just doing things by executive order, and rightly so. Just as we've criticized President Biden and former President Trump of doing things by executive order, that worries me. It worries me that someone running for the office of president is already saying, hey, I'm just going to do this by executive order. And the reason for that is twofold. One, what gets done by executive order gets undone by executive order, and that creates uncertainty, and it doesn't solve the problem. We've seen that with federal lands. One administration by executive order makes a big, huge swath of land federal land. The next president undoes it by executive order. We've seen the same thing happen with DACA recipients. We've seen it with a host of different things. And so the fact that Governor DeSantis would say, hey, I'm going to solve immigration, I'm going to do it with executive order, to me, that's not a strategy. That's a wing and a prayer. And the second problem to all of that is that when presidents do things by executive order, first, it will be undone by executive order by the next president of the other party. But the other thing that happens that's equally damaging is that everything ends up in the courts. And it works its way through the lower courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it politicizes the court. It's not the court's job to write the law. That's Congress's job. It's not the president's job to write the law either. And so when you do things by executive order, that's what's happening. And I guarantee you, whatever gets done by executive order will be challenged in the court of law. And what does that do? That creates uncertainty in the process. And that doesn't help solve the problem. So that was a big red flag component from Governor DeSantis' speech. Finally, Ron DeSantis invoked federalism. This was interesting in terms of how you can move some of this power from the federal government to the state.
If the federal government won't do its job, the states should be permitted to send people back. That is what you need to do. And right now, and look, there have been Supreme Court decisions, so it's not like this is just something that people are making up. Basically, they say, states can't intrude on the federal government's prerogative to enforce immigration because immigration's a federal issue, and so therefore what the feds say goes. And I don't know whether that's right or not, but if the feds have the responsibility to do immigration and they decide to just not do it, then are we just helpless and we don't have the laws enforced at all? And so I think the states have a role to play. I can tell you as president, we are going to fully deputize all state and local governments to be able to enforce immigration law. You will be able to have that authority.
Okay, very interesting. Talking about the tag team component of can you do some of this from a state level? So federalism, moving the power back to the states. And I think what Governor DeSantis is saying that, look, the federal government is not doing a great job at enforcing any of this anyway. Are there opportunities for states to step up and be part of the solution in that particular challenge when it comes to immigration reform? So states have a role to play, to be sure. Governor DeSantis says, I'm going to give states the authority to do those kinds of things. And so that's a really interesting battle moving on from that point. So lots to digest when it comes to immigration and border security from Governor Ron DeSantis as he makes his case to the American people as to why he should leave being governor and move to the presidential office. Really interesting stuff, some big red flags, and some ideas that are worth considering. So we'll continue to follow everything as it relates to the presidential politics. We'll step aside for some top-of-the-hour news. Much more to come in hour number 2, including Tim Carney is going to join us. We're going to talk about the cost and price of thriving in America. What does that really mean? A host of other things coming up in hour number 2, coming up next on KSL News Radio. Stick around.
KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City. Listen on the KSL News Radio app and in your car at 102.7 FM. KSL News Radio, your all-day companion for news.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the mutiny by Wagner mercenaries over the weekend. His speech through an interpreter carried on CNN.
I'm grateful to the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, for his efforts and his contribution for this peaceful resolution.
The head of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has reportedly gone to Belarus. He's accused the Russian military of attacking Wagner forces in Ukraine. The body of a missing 14-year-old has been found at Hiram State Park. Connor Bowden, last seen yesterday afternoon near the Hiram Dam. His body will be sent to the medical examiner's office for further investigation. A Utah company is challenging a study by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, claiming it put them in a bad light months ago and it was flawed.
We've been having periods where it had zero production and nothing changes. So we're challenging those guys formally. Additionally, their estimate of bromine is off by 1,000 times.
U.S. Magnesium Director of Technical Services, Tom Tripp, and another company spokesperson told KSL News Radio they plan to challenge that NOAA study, which claimed their plant on the west side of the Great Salt Lake can produce up to a quarter of the hazardous air pollution that we breathe during winter inversions. U.S. Magnesium claims that study had numerous flaws. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average now down on the day, had been up earlier, but it's crossed the middle point and down 11 points right now. Well, the NASDAQ has been down all day and right now down 156 points. And our KSL weather, we've got sunshine today, won't last through the week. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:02.
Start your days with knowledgeable, friendly voices telling you about the latest news and weather out there.
Hi, this is Tim Hughes and Amanda Dixon.
In the business of waking you up each morning from 5 to 9.
On KSL News Radio.
Earn $57,000 a year after 2 years as a transportation security officer at Salt Lake City International Airport. Learn more at the TSA Job Fair, June 29th at the Airport Business Park on 220 North, 2200 West from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Positions start at $22.49 per hour, include full federal benefits and a potential pay raise after 6 months. Register at jobs.tsa.gov/events, jobs.tsa.gov/events. U.S. citizenship required.
Hey, this week it's the summer savings event from Zero Res Carpet and Air Duct Cleaning. Today and tomorrow only, Zero Res is running their $25 carpet cleaning special. $25 per room for the no residue cleaning that you've come to love. And seriously, once you've had the best, why would you ever go back? Carpets, tile, air ducts, furniture, Zero Res can bring the whole home back to life. Maybe you're sensitive to dust and pollen, or maybe you're just sensitive to having to look at dirty carpets. Either way, the Zero Res cleaning process is exactly what you need. Schedule your cleaning today and get your carpet cleaned for just $25 per room. 4-room minimum, but no maximums. Cleaning every room in the house, just $25 each. Zero Res is keeping the call center open late to help as many people as possible, but you only have until 6 p.m. on Tuesday night to get this deal. Serving Nephi to Ogden, Park City to Tooele. Call or schedule online at zerores.com. That's zerores.com.
Sometimes people will ask me, Tim, how do you have all the energy you have to do all the things you do? And I have to tell you, a part of it is that I lost 34 pounds, a year and a half ago, and I've kept it off all this time. And I think back to when I was heavier, I would be by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be exhausted because we get up so early. But now I have afternoon energy. And I know it's because I'm not lugging around that 34 pounds that I had been for how many years. I did it on SOTA weight loss. SOTA stands for state of the art.
And you're going to have the energy to do more, which is then going to help keep that weight off. We've said it before, but imagine go to the gym, pick up 34 pounds of weights, and just walk around the gym for a while. It'll give you an idea of what you've been lugging around. My daughter lost 42 pounds, and she continues on the maintenance phase now. Find out how this company can help you or somebody in your family. Go to SOTAweightloss.com, spelled SOTA. Think Tim and Amanda, because SOTA Weight Loss is state-of-the-art. Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high-yield savings certificates. Here's Ricky Meeks.
We have a crash partially blocking a right lane of traffic southbound on I-15 at about 9th South, and it is backing traffic to the I-80 junction. Also, a report of a possible accident, 1300 South, 500 West. The Ute Stampede Rodeo and Carnival is coming July 13th through 15th in Nephi's Juab County Fairgrounds, featuring top cowboys and girls, bucking bulls, horses, and award-winning entertainment. Visit UteStampedeRodeo.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, warm, dry, breezy across Utah with a low-pressure system moving in midweek. That will increase our chances for thunderstorms. High today, 91. Tomorrow, 84. Right now, it's 85 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio. 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Nationwide, birth rates are falling below replacement population levels, including here in the state of Utah. People report the reason for not wanting children is due to cost or simply a greater desire to pursue other interests rather than parenting. But is that the whole story? What's really beyond the headline there? Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
We want to get past just the headlines of falling population levels, falling birth rates. And so, of course, we always turn to Tim Carney, senior political columnist at the Washington Examiner, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And Tim, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
So as you've been looking at this, even right specifically here in the state of Utah, kind of that top line headline is always, it's too expensive, healthcare is too much, cost of educating a child or raising a child is too high. But as you look at it, what's underneath the surface of just that easy answer of it just costs too much?
Well, so millennials actually are just as wealthy as my generation, your generation, Gen X, at their age, and probably wealthier than baby boomers were, and yet having fewer kids. And then you look at the fact that the current baby bust, where births have been falling every year for 15 years, that started in the recession, but Americans were still having more babies per person in the recession than they were, in the run up to COVID. That's an immense birth rate fall during the best economic boom time. So the economic account doesn't quite have that much explanatory power. But the couple things that matter, I think, the most. One is opportunity cost, that, women have more ability to make money and go to school now than they did 40 years ago. But again, that doesn't quite explain why it's changed so much over 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest explanation is going to have to do with culture. A, that our culture is not as family-friendly as it used to be, and B, religiosity. The number one determinant of whether people get married and have kids or have more than just two across the world is religion, whether it's, Catholic, LDS, Jewish. Religiosity, religious attendance is one of the biggest predictors of birth rate. And so the fact that our religious attendance is falling, again, among atheists, none of the above, or Christian or Jewish, well, that is a big reason why we're having fewer babies.
Fascinating. So I want to dig into both of those, and I want to start, you had a great piece in Deseret.com talking about your interaction with a young couple and why not more kids. And again, the easy answer was the dollars and cents, but underneath was a little different story. Describe that for us.
So, yeah, I went walking around the avenues. I'd been told, like, a really nice neighborhood. The houses are close together, but they're good-sized family houses. And I was just shocked. I walked around for hours looking for families to talk to, and they just weren't there. And finally, I ran into a couple, Isaac and Nicole, and I said, hey, I'm writing about family. And, the birth rate in Utah is falling. It's not number one state anymore as far as babies per person. What do you guys think about family? And they said, oh, well, we don't want to have kids, basically ever. And at first, they said, well, it's because of the cost. And then Isaac kind of interrupted himself and said, if I'm going to be honest, I'm just selfish. And then he said a line that I'll never forget. And he said, no offense, because I told him that I have kids. He said, no offense, but Nicole and I joke that while other people are watching Teletubbies and cleaning up vomit, we will be drinking margaritas in Paris.
And so it is that that cultural component is such an interesting thing in terms of that pursuit. What you describe as that opportunity cost. What people can do other than raise children. Dig in for us a little bit on the religiosity side of all of that. What does that mean? What does that tell us, both in terms of where we are from as a faith community, all kinds of faith communities, and what that means moving forward?
So I think I've looked at a lot of the social science data, and I've reported from modern Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, from Israel, from Catholic communities, from LDS communities in Utah and Idaho. And I think an important thing to realize is that, and no offense to any pastors or preachers out there, but it's not the homilies that are convincing people to have kids. It's not just the fact that God's first commandment in Genesis was be fruitful and multiply. I think there's a lot of other factors that go into it. And some of it is what you call anthropology. What is your view of the human person? Do you think that people are good? But then some of it is going to be, what is how important do you think marriage is? That's an absolute connection statistically between people who are married and see it as a lifelong commitment, and they're more likely to have kids, obviously, and to have more kids. Another part of it, though, I just think is, do you think that sacrifice for others is part of the good life? Or do you think it's just an unfortunate thing that you sometimes have to do? As a Catholic, I really believe that, the good life, happiness, fulfilling my purpose on this world involves laying down my life for friends. And guess what? You get a lot of those friends for whom it's easier to lay down your life once you get married and have kids. And then, though, to go to the cultural point, and we can talk about this next, religious communities set up cultural infrastructure that make it easier to raise kids. And that allows people even outside of your religion to have kids more easily. So in there, I talk about Utah, and I also talk about Israel, where it's just they try to make it easier for parents and easier for kids as well.
That's such an important part of it. I've been noodling over the weekend and conversation with some friends about the fact that we've kind of lost this support structure, as you mentioned, about family, this connective tissue. One of my friends mentioned the fact that, a daughter had just had a baby. Normally, you would be asking your mom or your sister of, how do I care for this little thing and do that. But now we just Google it or, pull up a YouTube video. And so even that natural structure seems to be withering a little bit, and that has to be impacting the overall issue.
It is, absolutely. You and I have said this, I think, every time we've spoken, but a wise woman once said it takes a village to raise a child. Whatever Hillary Clinton meant when she said that, we all know that's true.
Yeah.
We all know that you need that sort of support. And actually, one of the studies I found showed that proximity to the baby's grandma predicts whether or not baby's going to get a younger sibling.
Wow.
And you know exactly what that means, that if you have support from, somebody who you don't have to pay, somebody you don't feel bad, somebody who you think might actually be benefiting from caring for that baby, and someone who can teach you, not just take the baby off your hands, but give you some instruction, and that really helps. And so Israel, the wealthy country with by far the highest birth rate, about 3 babies per woman compared to 1.5 in Europe, 1.6, 1.7 in the U.S. Women there are twice as likely as they are in Europe to have their own mother, within a 10-minute drive.
Wow.
So, yeah, they're about twice as likely to have babies, too.
Wow, that is fascinating. And just before I let you go, I want to sneak in one last piece. As we look at that pro-family culture, you close out your piece saying, hey, just making it affordable doesn't eliminate selfishness. But how do we help create that culture or foster that space where sacrifice and happiness, not the pursuit of happiness like we like to throw it around, but the way I think Jefferson meant it, that happiness comes from discipline, virtue, and service. How do we recreate that model?
See, I don't think you can do that with any state laws or subsidies or anything like that. I don't oppose a child tax credit. I benefit from one. My wife and I have 6 kids. But I ultimately think it's cultural, and it's going to start with your worldview, but that it can also trickle out beyond, and that a culture that sets the norm, that you lay down your life for others, and that's the path to happiness, that's going to ripple out into the broader culture, even the people who don't have the same faith teachings that you do.
Yeah, so important. Tim Carney, senior political columnist at the Washington Examiner, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And yes, it does take a village, but the village is not the government. And this is one more area where community and culture have to lead. And I think the politicians will actually follow in the end. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, that's Tim Carney. And again, I think this is so critical as you look at population, you look at all the things that get stressed as population declines, especially as you look at things like Social Security, Medicare, and so on, all of those things that require funding. That's an interesting part of the conversation. But to me, it really gets to this whole idea, the Declaration of Independence was really a list of grievances. And in the middle, there's this line of the pursuit of happiness. And that pursuit of happiness, as Jefferson put it, was about virtue, discipline, and service. That's the key, and that's the core to the soul of the nation. And if we forget that, we're going to forget a whole lot of other things in the process. We'll step aside for a quick break. We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. Summer celebrations are almost here.
You can light off your own fireworks until 11 p.m. on the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, midnight on the 4th.
And the fireworks stands are open.
Even if it's green, it can still burn.
Don't burn down Utah. And come here for updates on safety and restrictions. KSL News Radio, your summertime fun companion for news.
Have you been waiting to buy a car until interest rates go down? I'm Josh Osborne with Volkswagen Southtown. With our rate cut sale, now there's no reason to wait.
Get 3.9 for 5 years at Volkswagen Southtown on any new car. And we have as low as 1.9 on used cars. Get the car you really want, like the Jetta, Tiguan, Taos, Atlas, or ID4 EV.
Save thousands in interest at Volkswagen Southtown, Utah's #1 Volkswagen dealer. Start shopping at VWSouthtown.com.
Claim since 2022. Financing through VCI on select models OAC. See dealer for details.
There's a right way and a wrong way to fight off mosquitoes. Karate chopping the air, in a public place, in front of your kids, and their friends, Mom, is the wrong way. Using STEM mosquito repellent is the right way. STEM effectively repels mosquitoes by harnessing active ingredients found in plants, like lemongrass and peppermint, making it safe for use as directed around people and pets. STEM, rooted in nature, optimized by science, and embarrassment-free.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
If you're hiring, it can feel like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You can hope the right person comes along, or you can just use ZipRecruiter. Like Marco, president of operations at Telly Tires and Auto Centers.
ZipRecruiter helps me find all the right people, even the most difficult jobs to fill.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Now try ZipRecruiter free at ZipRecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter.com/FREE.
Premium checking from America First Credit Union is so much more than a regular checking account. It's a saves you money, makes life easier, always has your back account, because it's absolutely loaded with fantastic benefits and features. In fact, it comes stocked with so much awesome stuff. It was voted Best Perks by Money.com. So make sure you're rocking more than a checking account. Head to America First and apply for the exclusive protection, perks, and paybacks of premium checking today. Subject to membership eligibility and conditions. Federally insured by NCUA. Since 1939, America First has been helping people pursue their financial goals. And as we have, we've become one of the largest credit unions in the country. The reason why is simple. It's because every day we do our very best to help each person, family, and business we serve to realize their individual dreams and achieve financial well-being. True to our name, we always strive to put our members and employees first. So come join us and let us put you first. America First Credit Union. Federally insured by NCUA.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomis. First, Russian President Vladimir Putin says a mutiny by Wagner Group mercenaries would have been suppressed, but an agreement stopped its march on Moscow before an armed confrontation. Second, a missing teenager was found dead at Hiram Reservoir after a day-long search. Third, U.S. Magnesium says a government study that blames it for massive air pollution is wrong, and it plans to fight it. Right now, 85 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Tomorrow, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Church History Department, will release the final volume in the Joseph Smith Papers. The papers have been foundational to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And what are some of the unique components to this final volume? What can we learn from the process of putting all of this together? We are really thrilled to have joining us in studio today Matthew Godfrey, Senior Managing Historian for Outreach and Engagement and General Editor of the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Brent Rogers is Managing Historian of the Joseph Smith Papers Project. And Sherilyn Howcroft is the project archivist working on the Joseph Smith Papers Project as well. Welcome to all three of you. And Sherilyn, I'm going to start with you for our listeners. Give us kind of the broad brush. We know this is the final volume coming out, but this has been a quarter of a century project. Give us some kind of a high-level view of what this was really all about.
So the Joseph Smith Papers started in 2001. We had actually started working on the project before we'd even received general authority approval for a few months, and then we received that approval in June 2001. It was a collaboration between historians at the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute for Latter-day Saint History at BYU, as well as church archives, which had a majority of the manuscript resources for the project. And as the project grew and we recognized how many people and resources it actually needed, we began to bulk up the team of people who were involved. In 2005, we moved to the Church History Library in Salt Lake City, and we just grew from there and started producing 2 volumes a year.
Wow, 2 volumes a year, and that is no small task. And Brent, I want to go to you next. As you look at that pace, that 2 volumes a year pace, that's a lot of history to be diving through.
It's a ton, really. I think it's unprecedented in the scholarly world of history of documentary editing to produce at that rate. Most papers projects, if they're fortunate, are getting 1 volume every couple or every 3 or 4 to 5 years. So for us to publish 2 volumes of very thick, heavily annotated volumes of Joseph Smith papers every year, it was quite a feat. But we needed to have, as Sherilyn pointed out, the resources, both historians, archivists, editors, to help put that all together. And so it wasn't like we had a small team. We did have a significant number of people, very talented, brilliant scholars, editors, archivists that worked on the project to do all this work.
Yeah, and Matthew, I want to turn to you now as you look at this from a broader brush. Most people think, okay, well, this only has to do with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the founder, Joseph Smith. But this has become really an international attention for so many historians, people in religious studies and otherwise, in terms of that, to give us kind of that broad perspective. Why is this grabbing such attention, not just among Latter-day Saints, but really among the broader community?
Well, I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one reason is that Joseph Smith was a major religious figure in the United States. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is somewhat unique in being a church that many feel was born in the United States and lasted and is still growing and thriving. And so I think there's interest because of that. I think, too, there's interest because, as Brent was saying, this is a project that really is kind of unparalleled in the scholarly world and in the field of documentary editing. We patterned it after the papers of other founding fathers, like the papers of Thomas Jefferson, the papers of George Washington. But the way that we've been able to produce these volumes, the website that we've been able to put together, is really, they're kind of cutting edge in the documentary editing world, and I think that's another reason.
Yeah, and Sharon, let me come back to you. As you look at it, again, kind of broad brush in terms of people getting an understanding of these papers, Joseph Smith, his history, all of the dynamics of went on as the church was founded and moved from place to place, political dynamics, local issues. What were some of the takeaways from this in terms of what does this really mean, and what are you really gleaning as you've gone through this deep dive over the last 25 years?
Well, there are a few things. One is that, for all the work that has been done previously on Joseph Smith, a lot of it high-level thinking and historical narrative, we have found more of the details of his life. He is a much more complicated and nuanced individual than we had really suspected. But also, we get a sense of his reach and his influence, both religiously, socially, and even in some respects politically. And so for anyone to be working on Joseph Smith and to understand him as a religious figure, they really need to take a dive into these records and see who he was, both in his writings, but also in those people who were associating with him, who were corresponding with him as well.
Brent, maybe play off that just a little bit in terms of that reach and that influence of Joseph Smith. What did that look like, and what have you learned about that reach that Joseph Smith had, even in his day, let alone looking at where we are today?
I think you see Joseph Smith's life play out in a way that almost day by day, event by event, that is really fascinating. With hindsight, we can look back at these records and see how he made decisions, how information got to him, and then how he responded to it in ways that are pretty unique and fascinating that narrative histories of Joseph don't always get to. So you can see him traveling in places. You see him traveling to Canada, so many places in New York City, Washington, D.C., and interacting with some of the major historical figures of the time. And not just with the major historical figures, with the ordinary people, everyday citizens, both in these locations where he traveled and especially among members of the church who followed him as a prophet of God, and the interactions that he has with these people, and us being able to learn more about those people and their lives gives us a fuller picture of the early Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a pretty unique perspective.
Yeah. And Matthew, before we go to break, I want to have you weigh in terms of that interaction, that impact back then, and now you're looking at a church of close to 17 million around the world. What's the critical essence of Joseph Smith to people who are in Taiwan and people who are in Japan and Australia and South America and everywhere else? What do these papers help them understand about Joseph Smith?
I think they help people understand that he really was sincere in what he was trying to do. Joseph very much believed that God had commanded him to restore the Church of Jesus Christ, and Joseph spent his life trying to obey that, trying to do that. And I think for me, what I learned from that is that, there is a lot that God can do through each one of us. It doesn't matter where we live or who we are. If we're willing to do the things that God asks us to do, we can do those. And I think that's a lesson that comes across clearly in Joseph's life.
Yeah, so important. If you're just joining us, we're really thrilled to have a trio, the Brain Trust is what I'm going to call you today, dealing with the Joseph Smith Papers. The Church History Department has announced that the final volume of the Joseph Smith Papers will be out tomorrow. And we're going to do what we love to do on this show. We're going to stay with the question just a little bit longer. We're going to have our guests remain with us. And when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the nuances of all of this and how we should be looking at history. Nothing like having historians in the building. I love this to give us a different perspective on what we're actually reading and absorbing. So we'll go ahead and we'll step aside for some bottom of the hour news. When we come back, more on the final volume of the Joseph Smith Papers coming out. Stick around. Interesting things for all of us to gain perspective from coming up next. We'll be right back.
It's 2:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top local story this hour. 2 of the 5 Republican candidates for Congress who are gathering signatures to make it to the special election ballot say they're confident they'll qualify. Becky Edwards is one of them.
We have this amazing team of volunteers left over from our Senate race who we just did this last year, so they're still, pretty well equipped to do this.
And Edwards didn't specify how many she's gathered to this point. Bruce Huff is the other candidate. His campaign says he's right now about 2,000 shy of qualifying. The National Weather Service says a controlled detonation west of the Great Salt Lake created the large boom heard across the lake in Weber County today. The Air Force issued a news release last month that said detonation is the best environmental method for disposing of large rocket motors. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Russian President Vladimir Putin speaking for the first time since a revolt by a mercenary group in his country. In his speech from the Kremlin, Putin said the rebellion would have been suppressed in any case. The Wagner mercenaries were persuaded to stop and turn around before they could reach Moscow. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average, down now 12 points after the close of trading today. The NASDAQ down 156 points, the S&P down 19. And our KSL weather, we've got sunshine today, but a low moving into the state later this week. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:31.
This summer, the political season heats up.
By August, it'll be time for debates. Can you believe it?
We're planning coverage of the real issues, the important stories that impact how we live.
Listen each morning from 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
At Intermountain Primary Children's Hospital, we made a bold promise to build the nation's model health system for children. Join us in realizing our vision for the future of pediatric care. So together, we can expand primary children's impact and ensure every child has access to the right care at the right place at the right time. For a century, Primary Children's has kept the child first and always. Help us continue to do so for the next 100 years. To get involved, visit primarypromise.org.
Hey, wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind. Like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest. Uh-oh. Or that time you forgot to roll up your windows in the car wash. Fantastic. Yeah, a remote control would have come in handy then. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Life doesn't come with a remote control. Yikes! So you're on your own with the wasps. You have the power to take control of prediabetes. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Give your savings a boost with 5% APY on a 12-month certificate from Cyprus Credit Union. Now's the perfect time to make the most of increased rates and earn more when you save. Open your Cyprus certificate and start earning 5% APY today. Learn more at any branch or visit cypruscu.com.
Cyprus Credit Union. Your future is our future.
Federally insured by NCUA.
If you've got a honey-do list with electrical, plumbing, heating, or air conditioning projects on it, Any Hour Services can help. Call Any Hour Services, electrical, plumbing, heating, and air. AnyHourServices.com.
Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high-yield savings certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
We are back to a crash-free commute. The accident we had southbound I-15 at about 9th South has been cleared, and they're still in the cleanup stages of the crash at 1300 South 500 West. Take a break from financial worries. Meet with a Mountain America debt consolidation expert for a chance to win a vacation package. Details at macu.com/debt rescue. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, warm, dry, and breezy across Utah. Then a low-pressure system moves in midweek and increases our chance for thunderstorms. High today 91, tomorrow 84. Right now 87 degrees and sunny at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
If you're just joining us, we're staying with the conversation just a little bit longer, which we love to do, especially when it relates to history. Tomorrow, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will release the final volume in the Joseph Smith Papers. That is a 27-volume set, includes over 1,300 journal entries, 643 letters, amongst a host of other things. And we've got the A-team in the building, the brain trust, managing historian, archivist, and pleased to have all of you here on the show. And I want to kind of pick up, and Sherilyn, I'm going to start back with you again, and give us some perspective of how we should look at this historically. I always say that it's hard to look back from our lofty perch of where we are as a society. It's easy to poke holes in the past. And tell us how we avoid that, or being the noisy tourist going to a foreign country that is history.
Well, in regards to Joseph Smith, one thing that we need to do is take him on his own terms. He lived in a very different America.
Yeah.
And when people start to really dig into the Joseph Smith Papers, one thing that they will find is that there's a gap between the person they thought he was and the person that he actually is. And so one of the benefits of the Joseph Smith Papers is that people are able to see Joseph Smith on his own terms. And he's a very complicated individual, but he's also very loyal to his friends. He's fiercely dedicated to them, but he also expects that dedication in return. He has an intense love for his family, a deep love of the Revelations, and he really has this forward-thinking mindset of what the church will become that is really quite fascinating to examine.
Yeah, and Brent, let's stay with that same thought in terms of the perspective you gain, in terms of Joseph Smith on his own terms, and for people, whether they are members of the Church of Jesus Christ or other faiths or no faith at all, what's the perspective? How do you take him on in his own terms?
I think you have to start with the understanding that history and the nature of historical sources is fragmentary. We can never know the full picture. There's not a one-to-one scale of the past. So what we have in the Joseph Smith Papers and in historical records of every generation is just glimpses, just a bit here and there. We can never know the full picture, but it's like if you look at one of those ancient tapestries, you can still see a beautiful picture of what happened, even if there are threads missing throughout. And so one thing that we have done on the Joseph Smith Papers is present the texts and the documents with accurate transcriptions and what we think are helpful contextual and textual annotations and information, not to interpret his life or try to provide judgment calls, but to provide understanding.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And being able to just put that out and then let people be able to process that and absorb that and interpret that themselves, I think is so powerful. And Matthew, let's kind of stay the same space here in terms of how do you go about that component to history of understanding, again, a different time, fragmented pieces of the puzzle. What is it that you came away with? What kind of distills down in those threads?
Well, I think for me, with looking at Joseph Smith, what comes across is you have to understand that he was a real person. He's a real human being. And I think sometimes, especially for church members, we kind of forget that Joseph's not this perfect prophet of God on the pedestal, but he's a human being trying to navigate life just like all of us do. And I think if you can look at that, you can see that Joseph really tried hard, as Sherilyn was saying, to be a good father, to be a good brother, to be a good son to his parents. All the while, he's trying to lead this church and establish a church, and he's doing all of this in his 20s and early 30s. He's not an old person trying, with a lot of life experience trying to do this. And so I think just giving him sometimes the benefit of the doubt and, trying to look at characters in the past from a charitable perspective, because I think that's how we would want to be judged.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want someone judging me on my worst day and my worst week. I'd rather have them look at some of the good that I was able to do in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that applies too when you're looking at the past.
Yeah. I had the opportunity one time to sit with David McCullough in Washington, D.C. We were actually in the Library of Congress, which is sort of the awesome setting. And he described history in such a unique way. He said that history was not this list of dates and locations, but it was this never-ending river of principles to be explored. And so, Sherilyn, let me go to you. And what are some of those principles that we should be exploring as we go through the research and everything you've compiled in these volumes?
I think there's a couple things. One is that, this process of gathering these records, of making these available, it takes time, but also even the process of combing through them, and reading it and assessing these records, it just takes time. I'm looking forward to seeing what becomes of the project. Because we've laid out the records, we've created access, but what does this mean?
Yeah.
We haven't connected all the dots for people.
Yeah.
So what will it become? How will our perception of Joseph Smith change in the future because of the work that we've done? And I'm eager to see where that takes us.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, tomorrow will be the release of the final volume of the Joseph Smith Papers. And Brent, as we look at this last volume coming out, kind of go to Sherilyn's point in terms of what is the therefore what? What is your hope as this final volume comes out on the anniversary date of the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith in Carthage jail? What is that therefore what moment for you?
Well, people will get a really in-depth, complex, nuanced look at the last 6 weeks of Joseph Smith's life, in a way that, maybe the shorthand is, there were, troubles and he gets put in jail and he's martyred, right? Like it's a overview.
Yeah.
But this volume gives like unfolding events as we lead up to it and things that people never have heard of or seen or read about before. And that history that provides that complexity, it's not just a hot take about the end of the prophet's life, but it is the deep, rich unfolding of those last 6 weeks of his existence on earth.
And I'm so glad you used that. This is not a hot take, because often that's what we do. We have that instant certainty, that snap judgment, and many people, again, inside the church and outside the church, have made that snap hot take judgment of who Joseph Smith was or what he represents. And I think all of these papers over the last almost 25 years have really shown the complexities of an extraordinary individual who did some amazing things in a very, very short period. Matthew, I want to go to you now as you look back across this project. What surprised you as you've gone through this process? What jumped out as like, wow, I was not expecting that to happen?
I think for me, again, it's going to go back to something I already talked about, but it's just the humanness of Joseph Smith. And even with this last volume, like Brent was talking about, you get this picture of the last 6 weeks of Joseph's life and how chaotic and hectic it is as things are kind of imploding around him, and he's trying to protect himself and his family and church members in Nauvoo. But there's also these periods of normalness in those last 6 weeks where he goes to the theater or he takes care of Emma because she's sick. Or one of my favorite entries in his journal from early in June, he goes out in the evening and he watches a thunderstorm roll across. And I just think, even when things are so chaotic and hectic, you can have periods of normalness. You can try to find peace in simple things.
Oh, I love that. So good. Sherilyn, how about a surprise moment for you?
One of those surprises, I think, has to do with the sense of the trajectory of his life. I think there's a general tendency for church members, because they are looking back upon this man who is the founding figure of the religion that they espouse, that they have the sense that he's a fully formed individual. And what was so fascinating to me working on the project was the sense of seeing his development, this incremental development. So in 1832, 1830, 1831, 32, you see him just trying to figure things out. Yeah. He's trying to test out these revelations. He stumbles, he stops, he moves forward, he takes a few steps back. He's just trying to figure things out. But then by the time you get into the 1840s, you see this very robust individual who's wearing multiple hats, and he's more capable and more articulate. And just seeing that trajectory of development in such a short few years was really fascinating to see.
Yeah. And then Brent, as we close out here, give us some sense of, again, I think all of these volumes have tried to take not a warts and all, but a holistic. This is a whole person. This is a developing person. What's the takeaway going from those beginning days, those humble beginnings, to now a legacy that spans the entire world?
We have a project and a print volume set that provides the backbone for anybody who wants to study Joseph Smith and the history of the early Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and any other faith that traces its roots back to Joseph Smith. And we can see how enmeshed and intertwined those people were in their local communities, with local and regional events and even national events. And so you get a picture of history that is multiple and layered, and it's quite fantastic. But the real legacy is that the whole of Joseph Smith's history and his texts are out and available, accessible for everybody. And all serious work on Joseph has to go to those papers and to the project, and that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that is it does it. I think that will be a benchmark and a game changer in terms of the study of the life of the prophet, and I think the study of leadership and faith leaders in particular, global world religious leaders. I think we'll all have to take a stop through these papers and through these volumes if they really want to understand what that looks like and what that feels like. Well, we're so grateful to have all of you in studio today. Again, we've had Sherilyn Howcroft, Brent Rogers, Matthew Godfrey, all of you. Extraordinary work. History work is the hard work and heavy lifting far away from cameras and microphones. We appreciate you joining us today as we get ready for the release of the final volume of the Joseph Smith Papers, which I think is, again, a landmark project, not just for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but for the rest of the world as well. Thank you for your efforts and for bringing principles through history and an extraordinary historic figure. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, we'll step aside for one last break. Some final thoughts coming up next on Inside Sources. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Utah's four seasons. Winter, more winter, scorching heat, road work. As the orange cones and yellow vests appear, count on the resources at KSL to help you steer clear. We'll let you know where the detours, closures, and slow spots are.
Come on, go!
Road improvement updates on your drive-in mornings and drive-home afternoons. All summer on KSL News Radio.
Where do you go to celebrate Independence Day in a big way without the big budget? Fun, food, a ping pong ball drop with prizes, and of course an incredible fireworks display, a free concert at 7:30, and more. You go to Bear Lake.
She got the blue jeans painted on tight that everybody wants on a Saturday night. She got the
Celebrate freedom this year in beautiful Bear Lake with country music star David Nail live. Monday, July 3rd at Heritage Park in Garden City at Bear Lake. Bring your blankets, bring your lawn chairs. Activities start at 4. The free concert starts at 7:30. Yes, it's free. Food, fun, and fireworks. And live music from country music star David Nail. Monday, July 3rd. For lodging and more information, go to bearlake.org.
I can't wait for what's next. Even with higher stroke risk due to atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat not caused by a heart valve problem. Eliquis, apixaban tablets, reduces stroke risk. It's the #1 cardiologist-prescribed blood thinner.
Don't stop taking prescription Eliquis without talking to your doctor, as this may increase your risk of stroke. Eliquis can cause serious and in rare cases fatal bleeding. Don't take Eliquis if you have an artificial heart valve, abnormal bleeding, or have antiphospholipid syndrome. While taking, you may bruise more easily or take longer for bleeding to stop. A spinal injection while on Eliquis increases risk of blood clots, which may cause paralysis, the inability to move. Get medical help right away for unexpected bleeding or unusual bruising, or if you have tingling, numbness, or muscle weakness. It may increase your bleeding risk if you take medicines such as aspirin products, NSAIDs, SSRIs, SNRIs, and blood thinners. Tell your doctor about all planned medical or dental procedures. Learn more at Eliquis.com or call 1-855-ELIQUIS.
Hey, Doug.
Yes, Kathy.
Tell folks about Window World doors.
Oh, yeah, thanks. We do entry doors, back doors, sliding patio doors, and storm doors.
And I just love the amazing door styles and the colors.
That's right, completely stained or painted, professionally installed with hardware.
So call us today, 801-281-8111.
Or visit WindowWorldUtah.com.
Window World, simply the best for less.
That's no baloney.
Men who have given up in their intimate life because of prostate issues, testicular cancer, or simply no ED treatments you've tried have worked. It's not the end. At Summit Men's Health, they have a customized approach for each individual patient to get results they desire and deserve. Stop wasting your time and money with treatments that don't work for most men, like Shockwave, Viagra, or the shots. Summit Men's Health guarantees results in your first visit, or you don't pay. Call Summit Men's Health today and get the spark back in your relationship. Summit Men's Health, 435-500-2790. They're so confident this will work for you, they promise if you don't get results on your first visit, they pay you $500 cash, no questions asked. Call Summit Men's Health today at 435-500-2790. That's 435-500-2790 to get the passion back in your love life.
Today and tomorrow only, Zerorez is running their famous $25 sale. Get on the schedule today. Visit Zerorez.com to get your spot today.
Register for breaking news updates by texting the word news to the Cyprus Credit Union KSL text line at 57500.
Most of us like to be out in the sun. That's why sunscreen and other safety measures are key to protecting your skin from aging and cancer. The FDA recommends using a sunscreen with an SPF of 15 or higher. Also, look for broad spectrum on the label. That means both harmful ultraviolet A and B rays are blocked. Remember, SPF plus broad spectrum equal healthy fun in the sun. Visit www.fda.gov/sunscreen for more information. A message from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
All the talks we've had over the years, including what you've told me about not using alcohol and other drugs, they stick with me. And believe it or not, they really do make a difference, especially at times that matter most.
Hey, want a drink?
No thanks, I'm good. So thank you, Dad, for talking and preparing me for what's ahead.
Thank you for talking.
For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
Managing today's uncertainty can be overwhelming. We crave security, and it's uncomfortable when we sense a lack of control over our lives. Develop a routine for a more balanced lifestyle with healthy habits and fun. Focus on what you can control, even if it's little things, like a before-bedtime ritual.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, candidates for Congress in Utah's 2nd District who chose to gather signatures to get on the ballot say they're confident they'll get enough before the deadline next week. Second, a big boom heard across Weber County was caused by the Air Force detonating old rocket motors across the Great Salt Lake. Third, Russia's president says the rebellion by Wagner Group mercenaries would have been suppressed no matter what, but he's grateful for help from Belarus to stop it before it resulted in bloodshed. Right now, 87 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City, and back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. Great to be with you today, as always. I am Boyd Matheson. As we round out the program today, I want to turn to a really interesting conversation recently with President Barack Obama and CNN anchor Christiane Amanpour. They had a conversation, spanned a wide range of topics, but centered around one discussion point that really caught my attention. And the question was really around how strong or how feeble are America's democratic institution? I think that's a question worth grappling with every day. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the interview, echo some of those questions, and get to some of the answers or some of the things that we ought to be curious about or things we ought to be questioning or leaning into. And as we listen to the former president reflecting both on his time in office and really kind of the state of our constitutional republic, I think there are some really interesting pieces of the puzzle that the former president lays out. So again, sitting down with CNN anchor Christiane Amanpour, the former president spoke about what he's seeing when it comes to our national politics and why he sees some cracks in some of our democratic institutions.
A strand of anti-democratic sentiment that I don't think it's something that is unique to one party. I think there is a less tolerance for ideas that don't suit us. It's sort of the habits of a free and open exchange of ideas, and the idea that we all agree to the rules of the game, and even if the outcomes aren't always the ones we like, we still abide by those rules. I think that's weakened since I left office, and we're going to need to strengthen them again.
Don't always agree with President Obama on some of the policy components. I think he got it right. I actually think he got it absolutely right, that there is a strand and a strain in terms of where we are politically, and a willingness to, you don't have to accept, but can you at least listen to a differing point of view? So President Obama also made an important comment about some of the institutions in our country becoming a little bit creaky.
I do believe that democracy will win if we fight for it. Democracy is not self-executing. It depends on the engagement of citizens. Our existing democratic institutions are creaky, and we're going to have to reform them.
Creaky, that's an interesting term from the former president, and I think he's right. I do think that we have some creakiness in some of those institutions. If nothing else, we have clearly some creakiness in the trust we have as citizens in those institutions. So speaking further about the trends that he sees in democracy, former President Obama talked about how polarization is being bolstered in American life.
The polarizations that we've seen in our national politics is not identical to what's happening on the ground. But what is true is that partly because of where people are getting information these days, the siloing of information, when people are getting such fundamentally different facts, or what they think to be facts, their worldviews are so skewed in one direction or another, then it's very hard for democracy to work. Not just the kind of misinformation that we see Putin engaging in the Ukraine situation, not just during election time, but just this constant demonization of the other side, making people fearful of each other. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be a problem that gets even more pronounced with the advent of AI and deep fakes and all these challenges.
So I think that's a real crucial part of that conversation, and this steady drip of misinformation, disinformation, and demonization of anyone who disagrees with you. That is a canker on the soul of the country. That is causing cracks in our trust and causing some creakiness in our institutions. Turning the conversation to the international stage, the former president gave his thoughts about how the war in Ukraine has jolted Europe into action and unity for the side of democracy.
Watching the Ukrainians themselves with such courage and bravery fight back, I think that reminded Europe of who they were. And I've been impressed by the degree to which Europe has stood up. It has provided the aid that was necessary. I think the Biden administration has very deftly managed maintaining that alliance to support Ukraine. And I believe the stakes are high to send a message to somebody like Putin that they are not going to just be able to willy-nilly determine the borders of other countries.
Finally, former President Barack Obama talked about how an American president approaches dealing with other world leaders, both democracies, autocracies, and otherwise.
Look, it's complicated. When I was president, I would deal with figures, in some cases who were allies, who do they run their governments in ways that I would say are ideally democratic? I'd have to say no. But you had to do business with them. I do think that it is appropriate for the President of the United States, where he or she can, to uphold those principles and to challenge, whether behind closed doors or in public, trends that are troubling. And so I'm less concerned about labels than I'm concerned about specific practices.
It is a complicated and often messy process that we call democracy, and in our constitutional republic, the most important thing, and I actually agree with President Barack Obama on this, that we have to be careful that we don't allow the creakiness of our institutions and our trust turn into cracks in our constitutional republic. That'll wrap it up for Inside Sources today here on KSL News Radio. I'm Boyd Matheson, and as always, as you go out into the world today,